In this video, I'm going to show you the most asked questions at Ross stores and help you get hired by planning brilliant answers to these. So let's start with the question that comes up most frequently, which is what times can you work at Ross? And they're going to be super interested in your answer to this, and if you answer it wrong, it's going to cause you problems. So the first piece of advice is you want to say yes as much as possible. If they ask you about a certain time, it's because they're really interested in that time. They know the staffing structure of the store. And so if they say, can you work at weekends? They are asking that for a reason. And you want to try and say yes as much as possible. You want to be open minded and be open to lots of different times. You want to be as flexible as you possibly can. And then you also don't want to focus on what you can't do. The way that people answer this really badly is they immediately give a list of all of the times that they can't work and then say, I can work all the other times. That's a very negative way to answer it. To answer this successfully, you always focus on what you can do. So best answers include things like, I am available to work the full range of store hours. So if that's true, that's really the perfect answer. You could also say, I can work all of the hours you advertise. So if they've said on the job advert what times they need, you can say that you can work all of those. You could say, I am open to overtime if needed. You may not be offered any overtime, but you can always volunteer that to show flexibility and to show that you're open-minded. You could also say, I can work at short notice if needed. Hopefully that wouldn't happen, but you can volunteer that if that's applicable. And then you can also say, I can work weekdays or weekends. In some interviews, they have asked about, can you work weekends? So you might want to preempt that by saying you can, because you're basically answering the question before it's asked, and that's a real positive. So this is how you answer it. Choose which of these on the list fit with your personal availability and try and show as much availability as possible, and don't go into detail about the times that you would prefer not to work because it's very negative. Focus on what you can do. The next question I want you to talk about is, what do you know about Ross stores? And in this one, you have to do your preparation. If you don't prepare for this, it's not going to go very well. So to be successful, you start by saying the things that everyone knows, the really obvious things. Then you think about what only some people would know, and then you go on to talk about what only very few people would actually know. And that's the way that you need to structure your answer. And now that you know how to structure it, the next thing is, what do you actually say? And so I'm going to go through all of the key things that you can talk about in your interview and give you a good, well-prepared answer to this question with all of the facts that you can bring to your interview. So the first thing you say is that it is a discount department store chain. That clearly answers the very basic idea of what the business is in a very short space of time. They've got their famous tagline, which is dress for less. That's really telling you quite a lot about what the business is doing. It's trying to offer high quality products at a very, very low price. But it's more than that. They also own DD's Discount. That's another part of their business. So mention that that's part of the same company. They are focused on high quality, low price retailing. And the stock in the store is constantly changing. It's not a case of if something's sold out, they replace it with exactly the same item. And every time you come in, you get basically the same experience. That's not what happens here. It's all about constantly changing stock. And that gives what we call rapid stock turnover. So that's the fancy way of saying things sell out and are replaced by something new. The inventory doesn't stay in the store very long, and so they end up with very frequent deliveries. The store is constantly getting new things at a rate much, much, much higher than any other department store that operates with a traditional model. They are a very fast growing business. They're opening new stores. They're getting bigger. Their business has been extremely successful, and that's spurring on a lot of growth. They have what we call really skilled buyers. The skill in running Ross is the buyers, the people that go out and find the products and manage to buy these products at such low prices that they can offer them at very, very low prices to the customers and still make money. The skill in Ross comes from the buyers getting those prices extremely low. Then you can talk about their purchasing power. They are huge. They are able to buy and source items at very, very low prices because they can buy enormous numbers of them. They were founded depending on how you work it out, either 1950 when they started as a department store, or 1982 when they adopted the off-price model, which is their current model, and it was founded by Maurice Ross, and that's a name that you want to take to your interview, and that's where the name Ross comes from. My other top tip is, since they are a publicly traded listed company, you can read Ross Stores About Us page and their annual report. Their annual report is what has to be published because they're on a stock market, and it gives you an immense amount of detail about the company. So you can read through that and you'll know their current strategy, and you'll know how their business is performing and what their priorities are. And if you say in your interview that you've read that, that's a really impressive thing to have done, and it shows that you've taken some time to prepare and that you really care about getting this job. So feel free to screenshot this page so you've got the facts ready for your interview. And if you talk about these and you've read the annual report and had a look at the About Us pages and you know the business, you'll be ready to be successful. The next question that is extremely important, which is, why do you want to work at Ross? And if you don't have a good answer for this, it's not going to look very good. So this is the number one question that I would suggest that you have an answer prepared for. So either bullet point and write down an answer, or have an answer worked out in your head and be ready to go. Otherwise, it's not going to be a strong answer and you're not going to look very good. So the first thing you want to think about when planning your answer is, why would you enjoy working at Ross? Why is this the right company for you? Do you love meeting new people? Do you love working with customers? Have you worked in customer service roles and in retail for a long time and you really enjoy it? These are things that you could talk about. Are you really interested in fashion and really knowledgeable about it? That's something else you can talk about. You may want to think about why retail. Why do you want to work in stores? Have you done it in the past successfully? Is this something that's a big interest and you see yourself as having a really good career in retail? So you have to, of course, think about the career opportunities. Do you see Ross as somewhere where you could have a good, strong, long-term career? And I'll give you some ideas of what you can talk about in terms of career development. You could say that you love the brand and you've shopped there for a long time. You've had really positive experiences as a customer. And whatever you do, make sure you show lots of enthusiasm in your answer. And so I'm going to give you more inspiration of some specific things you can say, but I also want to tell you the things that you should not be saying. So don't say, I live near a Ross store, or any idea that this is somewhere you've applied to because it's convenient to you. They're interested about how you're going to help their business and be good at your job and really motivated. They're not interested in how convenient the location is to you. Don't give them the idea that you just really need to earn some money and you're just taking this because it's a paycheck. That's not a very positive thing to say at an interview. Sometimes people give the idea that they want to work here until they can get a better job and want to move on. And so they talk about that they want to do this job for a short length of time and then go on to do something better. If you are a college student, then you don't have to say that. And I wouldn't recommend that you say, well, you plan to leave the company once you get your degree, where of course you do. And they know that. Unless you're studying for a degree that is highly relevant and you're wanting to go into store management, they will probably have assumed that and they know that you're at college. So that's fine. Just don't say it straight out in the interview that you plan to leave. That's not the right time to talk about leaving the company when you're doing your interview. And really, you have to think about anything that's not relevant to Ross stores, that isn't going to have an impact on their business. Don't bring it up. It's not important. Now let's look at the things that are actually important. So you can talk about your love of the Ross brand, career opportunities. If you look on the careers page on Ross's website, they say that 85% of promotions are within the company. So it's people being promoted into leadership positions within the store rather than them recruiting, say, assistant managers from other stores. It's about 85% currently. You could say that this is a long-term career if that's the case, that you love working in customer service, that you share their vision and value, and that you think they do an important job in delivering outstanding value and helping people have their money go further. You could say that you want to work with a growing company and that's going to provide you with opportunities for career development as the company grows. If you know someone that works there and they've got lots of positive things to say about the company, don't name them, but you can say that you've spoken to people that work for the company and they say it's a great place to work, and you can share in their enthusiasm. So there's lots of ideas of what you could talk about when they ask this question. This is the most common question and the one that I really, really strongly recommend you prepare for. So feel free to pause or screenshot this page and actually have an answer ready to go. Let's move on to another one. How would you handle a difficult customer? And of course, when you work in retail, unfortunately, you are going to deal with some difficult customers, and you have to know how to answer this question. So you have to answer it in the way that they want. So the first thing they want to hear is that you will stay calm. So if you've got a customer that's being difficult, they're being a little bit rude, they're being a bit annoying, you don't need to be wound up. You don't want to get angry at them. You want to stay professional. You don't want to argue back, and you're going to stay calm. The next thing you do is, if they're complaining, they've got a complaint, something's not went right, they're annoyed about something. If you show that you're listening and you actually care about what is annoying them and what's causing them to be angry and difficult, then that's going to go a long way to solving the problem. So say that you're going to be actively listening and show that you care about the problem. Apologize sincerely if something has went wrong. So if they're being difficult because the company has made a mistake and there's a problem and it was the company's fault, you're going to have to apologize and do that very sincerely. If they are being extremely difficult and they're being really angry and perhaps rude, your key thing that you're going to say is you're going to de-escalate the situation. It's all about calming the situation down, getting things under control, and that's about not making it worse. So escalation is making the situation worse, maybe shouting back at them, arguing with them. That's not what you're going to do. You're going to de-escalate, which is the opposite. You're going to follow Ross's policies. You're not going to make up your own policies. So if someone's not entitled to a refund, you're not just going to give them a refund. You're not going to give them free things just to make them happy. If that's something that you're definitely not allowed to do, you're going to follow the appropriate policies. And then the last thing you say is that your focus is on providing great customer service. Whether a customer is being difficult or whether a customer is the nicest person you've ever met, you're always going to provide good, high quality, consistent customer service. And that's always your focus with all customers. And if you say the things on this list, you'll have a really great answer to this. And it's exactly the sort of thing that they want to hear. Let's move on to another question, which is, what is your biggest strength? And it's always good before an interview to have your biggest strength picked out. And then for the next question, we'll look at your biggest weakness. So the way you answer this is you pick a significant strength. There has to be an actual strength that is, important, not just a strength that is irrelevant or not actually that big a deal. It has to be something very, very important to their business. And you want to think about, do you have any evidence for this? Or do you have some examples of when you've used this strength? So some ideas: you could have teamworking, empathy, prioritization, working with challenging customers, or having really good knowledge of fashion and brands. That could be a real focus for your strengths. So the way that you go about answering this is you say, a significant strength I have is, say what your strength is. Previously, I've used this strength to talk about your experience, talk about previous jobs that you've had when you've used this strength and how it's been successful, how it's positively impacted customers. Then you do the important thing of saying, when at Ross, I will use this strength too, and explain how this strength that you've chosen is going to make you really great at your job. When you're looking for ideas for evidence, if you've got a reference from a previous manager, if they've wrote something, or you've spoken to your manager at a previous job and they've said that these are your strengths, this is what I think you're good at, you could use that. If you've ever had feedback from a customer where a customer's thanked you for doing a great job, that's your go-to example. If you've got any qualifications that match with your skill, definitely mention those, and think about all the different times in your career where you've used that strength. And then if you can talk about that confidently, you will have an amazing answer. The next one you have to be prepared for is, what is your greatest weakness? And the way to answer this is shown on this diagram here. So you first start by picking a weakness. And the weakness that you pick has to be a real one. So if you say something like, my greatest weakness is being a total perfectionist, that is famous for being the worst answer to this question. People have heard it so many times, it's a fake answer and it makes you look bad. Don't say that. Then you want to actually do something to fix it. So talk about what you're going to do. You're going to practice this skill and try and get better at it. You're going to think about doing a course, or you're going to start learning about it and read about it and try to get this up and not have this as a weakness anymore over time. And then the most important thing is make sure that your weakness is not important to Ross Stores. If you say a weakness that is something that is on the job description, something they're looking for, you're not going to get the job. So, for example, if you were to say, I have extremely strong and offensive body odor that regularly upsets customers, and you don't get the job, please don't be surprised. Don't pick a weakness that actually matters. Pick a weakness that is a weakness, but nobody cares about. And the key to that is to really think about the right weakness. So here's some possible examples that they're not really going to be all that bothered about. So spelling. If you're not great at spelling, you can say that you like to word check, spell check things. You like to double check your spelling and you're maybe a little bit slower at writing, but that's fine because realistically in most jobs, as long as you're not applying to a management role, you're not really going to be writing very much. If you've got poor handwriting, that's probably not going to be a huge problem to you. So you could say that you have to write a little bit slower and be very careful because naturally your writing's very bad. You can read it, but other people can't. If you don't speak a foreign language and you're applying to a store which is in an area where people are almost entirely speaking English, then that's not going to be a huge problem. And most people applying will also have that as a weakness. If you're applying to an area where there's a very, very high Spanish speaking population, for example, I wouldn't recommend that you use this because that is actually a weakness that is not a great weakness. There are people that would speak that second language that would be quite good to help the customers. Then you've got delegation. If you're not applying for a management role, you're not going to be delegating very much, so you could use that. And then taking on too much, so you tend to say yes and you're really helpful, but you end up taking on slightly too much and you need to be a bit more clear about what you can and can't do. That's another great way to answer this. So that's how you get through what is your greatest weakness. Then we can move on to another really common question, which is tell me about a time you provided great customer service. And what you can do to plan and think about the example you're going to use is where you found a problem. So think about any time where a customer had a problem. Then you fix the problem, and that's going to give you a good answer. So just rack your brains, think very carefully about all the times you've worked with customers in your career where something wasn't good, but you fixed it. That's how you find your example. And whenever you're asked any tell me about a time question, you always answer it in the same way. You use what's called the STAR technique. Situation, task, action, result. So I've made up an example just to show you how this works and the sort of idea that I'm talking about with this finding a problem, fixing a problem. So you could start by saying, while working at another store, a customer's online order of a suit jacket was incorrectly picked as a cocktail dress. There's your problem. There's your situation. Then your task is, what do you need to do? So you say the customer was naturally annoyed by the error as they had an interview soon. My task was to solve the problem and restore customer service standards. That's what you needed to do. Then you've got action. What did you do? So the action was, I immediately offered a sincere apology and refunded the customer. I then set about reuniting the customer with the correct item by sourcing it from another location and arranging free 24-hour delivery with the approval of my manager. There's a really good action that you took. And then the result, the customer was delighted with the solution and posted a positive review of his experience online. So what you've done, customer had a problem, something went wrong, you fixed it, customer happy. Perfect answer. There are lots of tell me about a time questions that I've heard asked in Ross interviews. So the ones that I've seen in real experiences are where you've dealt with a difficult customer. So they might ask for an example, not just how you deal with it. We've talked about that, but an example of a time you actually did it, where you've overcame a challenge, or where you've had some conflict with another member of the team or conflict with a manager. And you can have examples ready. I would recommend you just think of the example. You don't have to write out the whole example, but just have an example ready for the good customer service, difficult customer, overcoming a challenge, and where you experienced conflict, but you dealt with it professionally. And you'll be ready for the most common tell me about a time questions, and you're going to follow the STAR technique to confidently answer these. And lastly, before we finish, here are some questions that you can ask at the end of your interview. So the first one I'd recommend you ask is you say, given that I'm very interested in the role, I'm eager to know what the next steps in the hiring process at Ross are. and make it clear that you're super interested in the job and you really want to find out what happens next. You could say, what do you enjoy most about working at Ross Stores? And when they say what they like most, you can share in their enthusiasm for that and say that that's something you would really enjoy as well. Then you could say, is there anything that you would suggest that a new hire at Ross do now to prepare for starting if successful? And if they suggest you should do this and you should do this, make a commitment, say, I will do that. And then that makes you look like someone that really cares about being good at your job. The next one you could ask is, what are the characteristics of your most successful and effective employees here at Ross? Find out what really great employees are like, and then you can talk about how you have those skills and that matches your traits and that you believe that you would be a very effective employee. And then lastly, you can try and think one up on the day. So if they say some things in the interview and you wonder about it, you might just think of a question when you're there. And that shows that you're engaging in a good two-way conversation. Don't ask about transfers to another store. Don't ask about pay. And don't ask about time off for holidays in your interview. That's an absolute terrible question to ask. So if you've got an interview at Ross coming up, please post in the comments. And once you've had your interview, if you could also post what questions that they asked in your interview, that would be really helpful to everyone to see all the possible questions that can come up. And finally, I'd appreciate if you would like and subscribe to this video. And thank you very much for watching.